The Baby is one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen. It begins with Anne Gentry, a social worker who's been assigned to a new family. One mother, two daughters, and a fourth member known only as Baby, a fully grown adult man with the mind and behavior of an infant child. But Anne starts to notice how unusually protective the family are of Baby, and as she does, an unsettling question gets drawn into focus. Is this a person with a genuine psychological condition, or a man who has been abused, traumatized, and contorted into the mental state of an infant? The Baby is a strange movie, and quite possibly the vehicle for someone's fetish. According to IMDb, the guy who plays the Baby is the son of the executive producer, make of that what you will. But none of that changes the fact that the idea it presents is disturbing. That we could be so damaged and contorted that we'd cease being what we are and become something else. And that's why, months after watching The Baby, I'll be staring down into my morning porridge when suddenly a scene from this movie will drive itself into my mind, and in that moment, I can't think of anything else, and I go cold. That's the feeling I want to talk about today. Movies that leave you a little different going out of them than you were going in, and why films that do this have value. An appropriate topic considering it's Halloween, November 14th. I'm not going to be talking about films that rely on gore or torture, because that's too easy. However, there are fucked things in all these movies, so I'm going to be leaving individual content warnings in the description below, which you should check out if you're sensitive but want to watch any of these movies. Especially the last one, okay? Especially the last one. Finally, I'm going to use this as a chance to talk about some lesser known horror movies, so I can nearly guarantee that there is likely going to be something here you will have never heard of. But if you have seen everything I talk about, let me know in the comments below, where you will earn my complete and utter apathy. Parents is a 1989 movie about troubled young lad Michael Lamy, who begins to suspect that his mother and father are not ordinary people, but that the meals they're feeding him are. The concept of being a kid and coming to realize that your parents are violent murderers is frightening, but what really brings that idea to life is how the film conveys it visually. Michael is shot to feel tiny and vulnerable, his parents impossibly massive and imposing, in these disturbingly surreal scenes that take the pastiche look of Perfect Family Picket Fence America and stabs it through with scenes of intense bloody horror. Shots like a bloody hand spinning in the garbage processor of a pristine 1970s kitchen, beautifully capturing the duality of the Lammies. They are the perfect family, they are violent killers. And it's how the unsettling visual direction of parents ensnares you in that idea, creating the feeling of being trapped in a child's nightmare. Disturbing Imagery has a long history with horror, and was the driving force behind perhaps one of the first truly disturbing movies. A man is sharpening a razor before turning the blade on his own fingernail, before then dragging it across a woman's eyeball. These are the opening moments of Un Chien Andalou, the Andalusian dog. Made in 1929 and running at 21 minutes, there were other horror movies made before this, but Un Chien Andalou was different. As a movie, it makes no logical sense. A series of barely connected interactions punctuated by frightening, disquieting imagery. Insects pour out of a gaping wound, a crowd peered down at a severed hand, a man drags two pianos stuffed with the corpses of dead mules on his way to attack a woman. Un Chien Andalou feels like a nightmare, and that's because it is. The film was a collaboration between filmmaker Louis Buñuel and surrealist painter Salvador Dali, and was designed to emulate the emotional impact of being trapped in a frightening dream. Buñuel was so sure that the film would upset and enrage audiences that he carried rocks in his pocket to the opening premiere in case he was attacked. And upset people it did, to the point that nearly 100 years later we are still talking talking about it. And I think the reason for that is it was the first time a horror movie reached beyond the idea of just fear towards something more visceral and disturbing. Surreal imagery can be powerful and frightening, and it's this distinct kind of horror that Unshan Andalou began that would echo through movies like Lost Highway, Eraserhead, and most recently 2018's La Cosa Loba, or The Wolf House, a Chilean stop-motion animation about a woman who flees into the forest in order to escape a cult-like colony where she finds an old hut with 2 small pigs and hides there for 100 days. Things start off okay, the woman growing attached to the 2 pigs, before the isolation begins to pick away at her sanity. As the space around her swims and warps, the pigs morphing into children as she sinks into a surreal, lucid dream world that slowly begins to bleed into a nightmare. As a wolf begins to stalk the outside of the home, and with their food supply dwindling, the woman realizes that it's more than just the wolf she needs to worry about. Her own children now looking upon her with a starved, mad glint in their eyes. The Wolf House is fucking stunning, a spectacular feat of animation, but its strength is how it uses the medium to create a physical space that feels like losing your fucking mind. And it's films like this that make me so disappointed that animation isn't used for horror more, likely due to the antiquated idea that animation is a medium for children. But there is a kind of fun middle ground here, and that is when a children's movie nosedives into pure abject horror. Take a movie like The Adventures of Mark Twain, a very normal kids movie for about 40 minutes, and then this happens.
Who are you?
An angel.
What's your name?
Satan.
What follows is 4 minutes of, and I shit you not, Satan explaining to 3 children how humans are nothing, existence is meaningless, and all life is fragile, finite, and pointless.
Nothing exists save empty space, and you are but a thought.
And it's horrifying. What is this doing in a kids movie? None of the rest of the film is like this. But I think there's something kind of compelling here. And I want to be clear, I'm not advocating we traumatize our children any more than we already do, which is a lot, but when I think back to my own childhood and the moments from kids movies that really messed me up, looking back, I really value those experiences in how they opened me up to the different kind of feelings that art could create. The donkey scene from Pinocchio was my first taste of body horror. The hell scene from All Dogs Go to Heaven put the fear of death and the afterlife in me in a way my Catholic primary school could only dream of, and the suffocation scene from Watership Down brought to life the brutality of nature in a way that totally changed my perspective on what animals are. And I think there's something really compelling about that idea. Not just that a piece of horror could be lying in wait in media when our defenses in theory should be at their lowest, but that it could change our perspective on the world around us. And in terms of upsetting kids movies that do this, there is little that compares to Plague Dogs. A dog struggles to stay afloat in a massive vat of water until finally his limbs give out and he floats lifelessly to the bottom of the tank, before being dragged out, resuscitated, and scheduled to repeat the experiment the next day. This is Plague Dogs, a film about the inherently cruel relationship between humans and animals, as our Labrador Rolf and his best friend Schnitter seek to escape the animal testing facility that surrounds them and find a new life in the English countryside. What makes that journey so harrowing is the unflinching level of cruelty this movie shows towards these characters, made worse by how genuinely like dogs Ralph and Schnitter feel. One thing I love about dogs, one thing I love about my dog, is they are innocents. They don't quite understand how the world around them works, but they are always trying to. And you can feel that innocence in Ralph and Schneider, but that's an innocence that's being subjected to first the nightmarish conditions of the research lab, and later to the beautiful but brutal outside world, as the two struggle to survive in a place that is infinitely crueler than they are, hunted by the humans they escaped. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are moments in this movie that are so shocking that they were cut from the original theatrical release, and trust me, when you see them, you will know. Is this a horror movie? Well, it is if you're a dog! But to me, this is genuinely one of the most disturbing movies of this video, and that's because the horror it depicts is something that happens every day. It is an accepted part of our society that we willingly tolerate, and it's that truth that makes Plague Dogs such a haunting, harrowing experience. One of the most powerful things horror can do is bring to light an uncomfortable truth about society or a specific fear of it. And it's that kind of fear that pulses through every second of 1981's Threads. Threads was made at the tail end of the Cold War, a period when fear of nuclear weaponry was an everyday norm. And it asks a simple question. What would it look like if Britain were struck by a nuclear warhead? And what makes that answer so frightening is the clinical, step-by-step approach Threads takes to answering it. There's a tactile, near documentary-like feel to how Threads unfolds. It doesn't try to dramatize or push a narrative through its events, it just presents us with the sheer, simple hell of nuclear war, as we watch different societal systems buckle and burst under the weight of atomic disaster. Hunger runs rampant, medical supplies dwindle, and a government turns on its people, in this just nihilistic statement of how truly fragile and meaningless a human life is in the wake of catastrophic disaster. There's one scene where, days after the initial bomb hit, a woman walks through the streets of Sheffield, the city around her now a giant concrete corpse, filled with the deranged husks of the people who used to live there, in what is, without a word of hyperbole, one of the most disturbing sequences I have ever seen, bringing to light a very real part of our history, as well as the absolute horror nuclear war would bring. This to me is a huge part of what takes a piece of horror from scary to disturbing. The part that, no matter how easily you may dismiss the supernatural, ghouls or ghosts, there's some insidious sliver of truth that is so much more undeniable and frightening. Relic begins with a mother and daughter arriving at the home of their grandmother, who has disappeared and been missing for several days. The two make their way through the house and notice things. An odd rot appearing throughout the house, peculiarly placed locks on doors and closets, post-it notes that read, "Don't follow it," with neither able to escape the feeling that there is something watching them from within the walls of the home, when suddenly their grandmother reappears, only for it to become uncannily apparent in the days that follow that this is not the woman they knew. This is something else, as the house around them begins to swell and expand to impossible dimensions, trapping them in the deteriorating reality of their grandmother's world. If this film sounds familiar to 2014's Taking of Deborah Logan, it is. Both movies take the fear of watching a parent drift into senility and imbue it with a supernatural horror. But while I think Taking of Deborah Logan might actually be the more frightening experience moment to moment, for me, what's so haunting and honestly beautiful about Relic is how it forces us to confront the disturbing truth of parents and children. How just as our parents cared for us as we came into this world, we will have to do the same for them as they go out of it. watching them become things that only resemble what we once knew, and coming to the chilling realization that one day the same fate awaits us. There's a lot of horror to be found in relationships, and particularly in the most intimate of our lives. While other people can be a source of great joy and passion, our connections to them can also become portals to madness and fear. And that is the disturbing core of Possession, a 1981 movie about a couple whose relationship has descended into a toxic, abusive hell, dragging them both into a violent insanity. Possession is a movie full of people being forced to face things they cannot accept or comprehend. Whether it be discovering the person you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with is now sleeping with someone else, or stepping into a room and encountering a creature of such unspeakable horror, your mind snaps under everything its existence implies. To me though, what makes this film such a unique and terrifying piece of film are the passionate, furious performances of its lead actors, but in particular, Isabella Adjani. She's able to make me feel more fear with a single subtle facial expression than most horror movies can with 90 minutes of runtime. And for a film with some real unspeakable nightmare imagery, the most disturbing moments of this movie is just her alone in a subway tunnel, losing her fucking mind, descending into a violent, unhinged madness as she succumbs to the darker forces that have begun to take hold of her. The film does occasionally meander into near nonsensical territory, and I do worry its attitude towards female sexuality is a little shitty, but it is a disturbing look at the dark and horrifying places a damaged relationship can bring us, and the depravity that lies there. Whoa, things are getting a little dark here. So let's say we take a fun little intermission and talk about the movie Funny Games. An Austrian family take a weekend away in their luxurious holiday home, only to be greeted by their neighbours, a pair of kooky, fun-loving knuckleheads. And what unfolds is a heartwarming weekend of comedy, romance, and most of all, friendship, in an earnest but light-hearted romp about how you can always believe in the kindness of strangers. Other people can be frightening, and that's true whether it's the people closest to you or complete strangers. And the last two films I want to talk about today look at how that evil can grow in those people. A sunny afternoon, two women film a trip to Miyagasaki Bridge, when suddenly they hear a scream, and turn the camera to capture the sight of a man indiscriminately stabbing people before leaping to his own death. This is how 2009's Occult begins, a bizarre pseudo-documentary about a small group of filmmakers trying to piece together what happened that day on the bridge, and begin to capture unusual things. Survivors suffering bizarre physical afflictions, dead people appearing in the photographs of victims, and for a while it feels like your standard found footage ghost story. But part of what is so uncomfortable about this movie is the gradual realization of what you're actually watching. The filmmakers begin to take a particular interest in one of the survivors, a man who has been marked by strange symbols and haunted by bizarre occurrences. But as they follow him, they get drawn into this intimate, pathetic close-up of a person who is nothing and no one, spending his days scrounging for the cheapest food available and his nights sleeping in internet cafes. The stabbing he suffered, the one notable occurrence of his entire life. And as the man begins to make increasingly unsettling claims, we begin to wonder, is this a crazy person, or is there really something darker at play here? The horror of this movie coming from how the emptiness of this man's life has been filled with something different, how that day on the bridge changed him, and what he is now planning on doing. disturbing look at how those at the fringes of society are most vulnerable to the insidious forces that lie beyond it. Last movie. I was about 14, staying up late, watching TV, and this movie comes on. I've never seen anything that made me feel the way this film felt. It horrified me and then disappeared into the void of late night television, and in the years since, I've never met a single person who's heard of it, and it was only recently I was able to track down a copy online, and it's called Last Summer. 3 teenagers find a seagull caught on a fishing hook. They don't know each other, but decide that together they're going to nurse the bird back to health. And as they do, a bond forms between them. Their parents seem oblivious to their existence, and so they find comfort in each other. They go to the movies, they smoke their parents' weed, they tell each other secrets, and it all has this kind of awkward innocence to it. All the marks of a feel-good teen summer movie. But it's like there's always this edge to it. A piece of dialogue will feel sharper and more callous than seems warranted. Scenes feel unsettling and tense, and then suddenly cut away before you could even establish what it was that bothered you. And while these teenagers are innocent, in that innocence, we start to see the capacity for a kind of pure-hearted cruelty. They don't seem aware of how their actions could hurt the people around them. There's one scene where they tie their seagull to a string and then repeatedly hurl it into the air in an attempt to make it fly, only for it to come crashing to the ground again and again as they scream and shout in delight, oblivious to the bird's torments. Later on in the movie, one of the boys finds the seagull, its head now crushed in by a rock, and the veneer of a teen summer movie starts to feel like a mask for something more ugly and hateful, and particularly when a 4th member joins the group, Rhoda, a younger, quieter girl who takes the place of the seagull as the group's project. And as the film descends into its final third, I can never shake the uncomfortable feeling that I am watching these characters in hell. In a video where I've been pretty liberal with the definition of horror, this is definitely the least horror thing we've talked about, but to me, the most disturbing. And the reason for that is it draws into focus an idea that frightens me more than any other. That even in the most innocent among us, there is terrible and awful things. We've talked about a lot of dark stuff today, and the question we have to come back to is why? Why would you put yourself through any of this? Well, for me, I've talked before about how horror can help us confront the most upsetting parts of the world we live in and do so on our terms. And I think there's real comfort in that. But I think with movies like this, there's another reason too. When a horror film gets me, like really, really gets me, when I am staring down into my morning porridge and The Baby or Possession or Last Summer drives itself into my mind, that's also a moment I'm free from all other worries. I'm not thinking about my job or my personal life or the fact that the world feels more on fire now than any time I can remember. In other words, the disturbing places that these films bring us, they are frightening, but they are also an escape, taking the more mundane horrors we face every day and replacing them with ones that ultimately we can walk away from. And I think that has value. I think we need that. Friends, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, well, YouTube does not like videos like this, so there's every chance it's going to be suppressed or demonetized. And so if you want to help make stuff like this viable, you can support me over at patreon.com/super Eyepatchwolf, where for a single dollar you can help keep these videos strange and fun. This week's spookiest poos are Tess Thompson, Sienna, Puya Satari, Teresa Adamo, Mystic the Manakati, Arthur Ward, and Dusty Doug. Find me as ever on the currently on hiatus Let's Fight a Boss video game podcast or on Twitter at Eyepatchwolf. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.